They say that a mother's love is boundless. Perhaps that's true, but patience is a finite thing. Mine ran out on that clear October day when my only son, Torrance, told me that his new wife did not want me to give a toast at their wedding. My name is Lavinia Thorne. I am 67 years old, and I have spent the last 40 of them caring for others. First, for my husband Emmett, who left me for an accountant from his office when Torrance was 12. Then for my son, who knew how to drain me of everything, money, strength, soul, from the time he was a child. I loved him madly, as only those who raise a child alone can love. Maybe that's why I never learned to say no to him. I worked as a tax inspector in our small town of Modesto for 25 years. Nothing special, just the usual paperwork, audits, and occasional field trips. But I was proud of my work. I was good with numbers, and the stability gave me a sense of order that was so lacking in my personal life. Plus, I was able to save a decent amount for retirement, or at least I thought I could. After the divorce, Torrance stayed with me. Emmett sent child support, but not regularly. He said he was having difficulties, that his new family was expensive. Then he stopped altogether when he moved to another state. I didn't chase after him, but my pride wouldn't let me. Besides, I thought my son and I could manage on our own. Torrance had always been a difficult child. After his father left, he became withdrawn, rude, and lied a lot. I blamed it on teenage rebellion and the trauma of the family breakup. He just needs time, I told myself when I found cigarettes in his room or when the school called with yet another complaint. By the age of 20, he had tried 3 colleges but hadn't finished any of them. The teachers don't understand me. The program is outdated. It's all a waste of time. The excuses changed, but the essence remained the same. In between studies, he lived at home, occasionally working as a courier or in a call center, but he never stayed at any job for more than 3 months. I paid for his education, his car, and his health insurance. When he quit another job, I silently paid his phone and credit card bills. When he finally moved out at the age of 27, it seemed like a miracle. I continued to help with the rent. "It's temporary, Mom," he would say, taking another check. "As soon as my career takes off, I'll pay you back." His career consisted of reselling used electronics and trying to make money off cryptocurrencies. He occasionally tried his hand at network marketing, but as usual, he quickly lost interest in new ventures. When Torrance turned 32, he introduced me to Imogen Pruitt, a petite blonde with blue eyes and perpetually pursed lips. She worked at the post office and had very specific ideas about life, which she was not shy about sharing with those around her. Imogen was 5 years older than Torrance and, as she liked to emphasize, knew what she wanted. She wanted a house, a car no more than 3 years old, and a husband who could provide her with a decent life. How Torrance convinced her that he met these requirements remains a mystery to me. Perhaps she simply didn't know about my role in his finances. Their relationship developed rapidly, and soon they announced their engagement. By that time, I had retired and was living on my savings and a small pension. The house was paid off, which made my life much easier. But when Torrance asked to borrow $20,000 for the wedding, I felt the ground slip away from under my feet. "It's my only wedding, Mom," he pleaded, looking at me with the same look he had used since childhood when he wanted a new toy. "Imogen deserves a real celebration. Besides, you're the only one who can help. Her parents aren't very well off." And I gave in, as I always did. I withdrew the money from my savings account, paid the penalty for early withdrawal, and gave it to him. Deep down, I hoped that Imogen would have a positive influence on him, that he would finally grow up, find a stable job, and that my financial support would no longer be necessary. Instead, after the wedding, the situation only got worse. Now they came together, him looking guilty, her with a long list of things they needed. A new refrigerator because the old one was too noisy, bathroom renovations because the tiles were outdated, money for a vacation because everyone needs a break. On the day of the wedding, I arrived at a small country hotel 2 hours before the ceremony. I wanted to help with the last-minute preparations and see how Torrance was getting ready for his big day. But when I walked into the room where he was getting dressed with his friends, he gave me a strange look. "Mom, could you wait in the lobby?" he said, looking away. "We're a little busy here." I detected familiar notes in his voice, a mixture of irritation and embarrassment that appeared when he felt uncomfortable around his friends because of my presence. I left silently and spent the next hour sitting in an armchair by the fireplace in the empty hall, clutching the envelope with the check. My wedding gift, which I had scraped together with difficulty, borrowing part of the money from my old friend Kira. The ceremony went smoothly, although I was not seated in the front row as the groom's mother, but somewhere to the side, between Imogen's distant relatives. During the photo shoot, I was called in for only 2 pictures. "Too many people, Mom, we have to save time," Torrance explained. The reception began at 6 in the evening. The hall was decorated with white lilies and silver ribbons, exactly as Imogen had wanted. I sat at a table in the back with some of the bride's elderly relatives, who spent most of the evening discussing their ailments. When the toasts began, I waited to be asked to say a few words. After all, I was the groom's mother. Besides, I had prepared myself. I had written a short speech on a card, which I was now nervously crumpling in my hands. The toasts were given by Imogen's father, her sister, and Torrance's best friend. But I wasn't called. At one point, I noticed Torrance approaching my table. Finally, I thought, but the look on his face didn't bode well. "Mom," he began quietly, leaning toward my ear, "I have something to tell you. Imogen doesn't want you to give a toast." "What?" I wasn't sure I had heard him correctly. "She thinks you might say something inappropriate," he said, glancing nervously at his wife, who was watching us from across the room. "You know how direct you can be. I felt my face flush. Inappropriate? What could I possibly say that would be inappropriate at my own son's wedding? She's just very nervous. It's her day, our day," he corrected himself, noticing the look on my face. "Please don't make a scene. Don't make a scene." That's what I was to him, a potential problem, a source of embarrassment. I, who had given him everything I had my entire life. Something inside me broke at that moment. No, it didn't break. It fell into place, like a bone after a long fracture. I slowly took the envelope with the check out of my purse, my wedding gift. $3,000 that I had saved over the last 6 months, skimping on everything, including my arthritis medication. "Torrance," I said in a surprisingly calm voice, "I want you to understand something." I stood up and raised my glass. Not loudly, just stood up at my table. Several of the nearest guests turned toward me. "This envelope," I said, showing it to my son, "contains the money I was going to give you and Imogen, but now I see there's no need for it." Torrance turned pale. "Mom, please." I tore the envelope in half, then again and again. Pieces fell to the floor like confetti. "I wish you happiness without my help," I said loudly enough for the neighboring tables to hear. "From this moment on, you are on your own." Torrance's face contorted with horror and anger. He grabbed my elbow and tried to pull me away, but I broke free. "Don't make a scene, son," I said with a smile. "This is your day." I grabbed my purse and headed for the exit. As I passed the head table, I caught Imogen's eye. Her eyes widened and her lips pressed into a thin line. "All the best, dear sister-in-law," I said with the same smile. "I hope you know what you've gotten yourself into." Later, I learned that a scandal had erupted after I left. Imogen was screaming that I had ruined her wedding. Torrance was rushing between the guests, trying to smooth things over. His version of events was that I was having a nervous breakdown and alcohol problems, lies he had apparently made up on the spot. But at that moment, I didn't know any of that. I drove home and felt an amazing lightness for the first time in many years. It was as if I had thrown off a heavy backpack that I had been carrying around for decades. At home, I turned off my phone, poured myself a glass of wine, and sat on the porch looking at the stars. Tomorrow, I was going to start a new life, a life in which I was no longer an ATM for my own son. It scared me, but at the same time, it filled me with a strange, almost forgotten feeling of freedom. At that time, I didn't know that the hardest part was yet to come, that in 3 months, Torrance would show up at my doorstep with a new story and new demands. But that was tomorrow, and today I was just sitting under the starry sky of Modesto and thinking only about myself for the first time in many years. The first days after the wedding passed in a strange stupor. I woke up every morning thinking that I should call Torrance, apologize, and say that I had acted rashly. But then I remembered the look on his face when he told me about Imogen's decision, and my hand automatically put the phone back on the nightstand. Torrance called for the first 2 weeks, every day at first, then every other day. I didn't answer. The messages piled up in my voicemail, but I didn't listen to them. Once he came by and knocked on the door for almost an hour while I sat in my bedroom with my hands over my ears like a child. I was ashamed of my childish reaction, but I was afraid that if I saw him, I would give in, as I had done hundreds of times before. Something in me broke that day, something that could never be repaired. November arrived, bringing with it drizzling rain and thick fog that enveloped Modesto in the mornings. My house on the outskirts of town stood on a small hill, and sometimes, when I woke up early in the morning, all I could see from the window was a white, milky sea with the roofs of neighboring houses peeking out. At times like these, I felt like I was on an island cut off from the rest of the world. And strangely enough, this feeling brought me not anxiety, but peace. For the first time in many years, I started doing housework. I cleaned out the closets, threw away Torrance's old things that he never picked up, and rearranged the furniture in the living room. I bought new curtains, light blue ones, to replace the heavy burgundy ones that had been hanging there since Emmett's time. I started gardening, cleared the overgrown flower beds, and planted tulip bulbs for spring. Her hands ached from the unfamiliar work, but it was a pleasant, cleansing pain. Sometimes anxiety would wash over her, especially at night. She would wake up screaming, having nightmares. Torrance was little, lost, calling for her, and she couldn't find him in the fog. At times like that, she almost broke down and called him. But I always stopped myself, remembering the years of manipulation, the eternal guilt he knew how to evoke in me with a single glance. By early December, the calls had stopped. I caught myself checking my phone more often than I should have. The lack of messages from my son was both a relief and a burden. A week before Christmas, I ran into Audrey Lamb, the mother of Torrance's best friend, Wilfred, at the supermarket. We had never been particularly close, but we had maintained a polite relationship for many years while our sons were friends. "Lavinia!" she exclaimed when she spotted me at the canned goods aisle. "I haven't seen you in ages." Audrey was a full-figured woman with bright red hair, which she stubbornly dyed despite being in her 60s. Her loud voice always attracted attention, and now several shoppers turned in our direction. "Hello, Audrey," I replied quietly, feeling awkward. "How are you?" "Same old, same old. Wilfred just got a promotion. He's the assistant manager now. And my grandson started first grade. Can you believe it? Time flies. How's your Torrance? Wilfred said they were having some problems?" My heart skipped a beat. Problems? What kind of trouble? Audrey leaned closer, lowering her voice to a theatrical whisper. "Well, he said that things aren't going well with that Imogen. She seems unhappy with their financial situation. Wilfred said Torrance asked him for a loan last month, a rather large sum." I felt something tighten inside me. It wasn't pity. It was something else I couldn't put my finger on. We haven't been in touch much lately," I replied evasively. Audrey nodded understandingly, but I saw a flash of curiosity in her eyes. I understand. Newlyweds need space, although Wilfred said they live in a rather cramped apartment. But that's only temporary, of course." I smiled politely, trying not to show how her words had hurt me. Temporary. Yes, it was supposed to be temporary. 3 years ago, when I gave Torrance the money for the down payment on an apartment they never bought because the money went into some promising business that went bust within a month. "Well, I'll be going," I said, feeling the need to end the conversation quickly. "It was nice to see you." Of course, Audrey waved her hand. "Say hello to Torrance if you see him before I do, and tell him Wilfred is still waiting for him to pay back that money. The holidays are coming, you know." I nodded and hurried to the checkout, forgetting half of the groceries I had come for. At home, I sat in the kitchen for a long time, looking out the window at my snow-covered garden. So they were having financial problems. So Torrance was borrowing money from his friends again. Part of me felt a grim satisfaction. That's what happens when you refuse my help. But another part of me was worried. How far would he go? Who else would he try to borrow from? Would he get into trouble? I spent Christmas alone for the first time in many years. I cooked a turkey, opened a bottle of good wine, and watched old movies on TV. It was quiet and peaceful, without the usual hustle and bustle. No need to cook a huge dinner for Torrance and his friends, who usually showed up unannounced. No arguments or demands for gifts I couldn't afford. On New Year's Eve, Kira called, my old friend whom I hadn't seen in several years because she had moved to Sacramento. "How are you, love?" she asked after we exchanged greetings. "Celebrating with Torrance?" "No," I replied, surprised at how easy it sounded. "We're growing apart a little lately." Kira was silent. She knew about my relationship with my son and had often told me that I spoiled him too much. But now there was no condemnation in her voice. "Maybe it's for the best," she said finally. "You've always given him too much. It's time to think about yourself." That night, I couldn't sleep for a long time. Kira's words kept running through my head. Myself? I hadn't thought about myself in so long that I had almost forgotten how to do it. My life had revolved around Torrance's problems for so long that without them, there was a void. But maybe that void could be filled with something new. In early January, I signed up for a gardening class at a local college and started going to a Nordic walking group for seniors. New activities and new acquaintances gradually filled my time. I still thought about Torrance often, but those thoughts no longer caused me as much pain as they had before. I heard bits and pieces of news from mutual acquaintances. Torrance had lost another job, something related to online sales. Imogen was unhappy, and they argued frequently. She threatened to move back in with her parents. He promised that everything would work out. These stories sounded so familiar. He had promised me the same thing, that he was about to get back on his feet. He just needed a little more help. At the end of January, Bethany Welch, my former colleague from the tax office, whom I sometimes met for coffee, stopped by. She lived not far from Torrance and Imogen's apartment and seemed to be aware of the latest developments. "Did you know they moved out?" she asked, warming her hands on her teacup. "I saw them loading a van last week. Torrance looked not great." "Moved out?" I tried to sound indifferent, but my heart was pounding. "Where?" "I'm not sure, but according to Loretta, you remember Loretta from across the street? They hadn't paid rent in 2 months. The landlord kicked them out." I was silent, not knowing what to say. The thought of my son being out on the street was alarming, but at the same time, wasn't this what I wanted? For him to finally face the consequences of his actions? "And also," Bethany continued, lowering her voice, "they say Imogen dumped him. She moved back in with her parents in Sacramento. I saw her leaving with her suitcases before the eviction, all alone." For some reason, this news didn't surprise me. Imogen had always struck me as a calculating person. She stayed with Torrance as long as she thought he could provide her with a certain standard of living. When reality set in, she left. After Bethany left, I stood at the window for a long time, looking out at the snow-covered street. Where was Torrance now? Which of his friends was he staying with? Or had he rented some cheap room on the outskirts of town? And most importantly, had he learned anything from this experience? I got the answers to these questions exactly 3 months after the wedding. It was a cold January evening. I had just returned from gardening class and was preparing dinner when I heard a knock at the door. Through the peephole, I saw Torrance. He was standing hunched over in an old jacket that was too light for the weather. His cheeks were sunken, and he had dark circles under his eyes. He looked much older than his 32 years. I hesitated for a moment. Part of me wanted to slam the door shut and not let him into my new, peaceful life. But he was my son, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop loving him. I opened the door. "Mom?" His voice was hoarse, as if he hadn't spoken in a long time. "Can I come in, please?" I stepped back silently, letting him into the house. He entered cautiously, as if afraid I would change my mind. He took off his boots, a habit I had instilled in him as a child. There was something so familiar and homey about this simple gesture that my heart ached. "You changed the curtains," he remarked, looking around the living room. "They look nice. Brighter." "Thanks," I replied dryly. "Would you like some tea?" "Yes, if you don't mind." I went into the kitchen, feeling him follow me. I put the kettle on and took out the cups. All this time, Torrance was silent, shifting from foot to foot by the door. "Sit down," I said, pointing to a chair, "and tell me why you came." He sat down, resting his hands on the table. I noticed that his fingernails were bitten down to the quick, a childhood habit that returned in moments of stress. "Mom, He faltered, searching for the right words. "I came to apologize. For the wedding. For everything. I was wrong." I said nothing, just looked at him. Torrance never apologized. He made excuses, blamed circumstances, other people, but never admitted he was wrong. "Imogen left," he continued, lowering his eyes. "She said I wasn't the man she married, that she didn't sign up for a life of poverty." "When did that happen?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "A month ago, we tried to make it work without your help. We really did. I found a job at a computer store. Imogen worked at the post office. But the rent, the bills, everything got so expensive, and then I lost my job and she left," I finished for him. No surprise there. He threw his head back, a flash of hurt in his eyes. "She betrayed me. She just abandoned me when the going got tough." "What did you expect, Torrance?" I crossed my arms over my chest. "That she would put up with poverty for you? She always made it clear what she wanted out of life." "I thought she loved me," he said, his voice sounding so sincere that for a moment I felt sorry for him. "Maybe she did, in her own way, but love doesn't always stand up to the test of reality." The kettle whistled, interrupting our conversation. I made some tea and placed the cup in front of my son. He wrapped his hands around it as if trying to warm himself. "I was an idiot, Mom," he said quietly. "You were always there for me, always helping me, and I let Imogen come between us. It was a mistake. I realize that now." I looked at him, trying to see the truth behind his words. Did he really realize his mistakes? Or was he just in a desperate situation and remembered his mother as his last resort? "I have nowhere to live," he continued without looking up. "I've been staying with Wilfred for the last 2 weeks, but his wife, she's unhappy. She says they don't have enough room, and I thought that you can come back here," I finished for him. "Live like you used to." He nodded, hope appearing in his eyes. "Just until I get back on my feet. I'll find a job, I promise. And I'll help around the house. Everything will be different, Mom. I've changed." I had heard those promises dozens of times, and every time I believed him. Every time I let him back into my life, giving him another chance. And every time it ended the same way, empty promises and an empty wallet. But now, looking at his gaunt face and trembling hands, I couldn't just kick him out the door. No matter how hard I tried to distance myself, he was still my son. The boy I once carried in my arms, read bedtime stories to, taught to tie his shoelaces. "You can stay on the couch," I finally said, "temporarily, until you find a job and a place to live." Torrance's face lit up. "Thank you, Mom. You won't regret it, I promise. I'll make everything right." I nodded, unable to share his enthusiasm. Something told me that I would regret this decision, but now, on this cold January evening, I couldn't do anything else. I just didn't know then that my compassion would be interpreted as weakness, and that the real trials were only just beginning. The first week of living with Torrance reminded me why I had been so happy when he left. Despite all the promises made on the first night, reality turned out to be predictably different. The sofa in the living room where he slept was constantly covered with his things. The kitchen cabinets remained open, and the sink was piled high with dirty dishes. The food I bought for the week disappeared from the refrigerator. At first, I kept quiet. I told myself that he needed time to settle in, cope with the breakup, and adapt to the new situation. But when, on the 4th day, I discovered that my bank card, which I always kept in the top drawer of the dresser, was missing, my patience ran out. "Did you take my card?" I asked, standing in the living room doorway, where Torrance was lying with his tablet, watching some videos. He didn't even look up from the screen. "I needed to fill up the car. I was going to tell you." "How much did you take?" "Only $50, Mom. Don't make a big deal out of it." I took a deep breath, trying to hold back my anger. "Torrance, we agreed that you would stay here while you looked for a job. Have you even tried looking? He finally looked up from his tablet and glared at me. Of course I've tried. It's not easy to find anything decent in Modesto, especially with my resume. What have you done specifically? Sent out resumes? Gone to interviews? He shrugged. I looked at jobs online, but they all require experience, which I don't have, or education, which I also don't have. You know how it works. I knew he would find excuses not to do anything, that he would live off me as long as I let him, and that nothing would change unless I changed my behavior. Starting tomorrow, I'm changing the Wi-Fi password, I said calmly. It will only work from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. when you're supposed to be looking for a job. And no more borrowing from my card. If you need money, earn it. His face contorted with indignation. Seriously? You're going to control my Wi-Fi like I'm 14? How am I supposed to look for a job without the internet? At the library, at a cafe, at employment agency, where people usually look for jobs when they really want to find one. He looked at me with disbelief, as if he were seeing me for the first time. Perhaps he was. The old me, the one who always gave in, always compromised, always put his needs before mine, was gone. I slept poorly that night, listening for footsteps around the house. In the morning, I discovered that $20 was missing from my wallet, and the bottle of whiskey I kept for special occasions was gone. Torrance was still asleep, sprawled out on the couch. I looked at him, a grown man, my son, and felt nothing but exhaustion. He wasn't going to change. Not at 32, not after a whole life built on someone else solving his problems. When he finally woke up, closer to noon, I had already made up my mind. We need to talk, I said when he came into the kitchen, yawning and stretching. Sit down. He sat down reluctantly, looking at me warily. What's wrong? I'm not going to support you financially anymore, I said bluntly. No money for gas, food, bills, nothing. He smiled as if I had made a joke. Okay, Mom, I get it. I'll pay you back the $20. It's not about the $20, Torrance. It's about the fact that you're 32 years old and you're living like a teenager who thinks the world owes him something. That ends today. He stopped smiling. What does that mean exactly? It means you can stay here for one more week. During that time, you need to find a job and a new place to live. Or at least a job, and then I'll give you another month to find a place. But starting today, I'm not paying for anything except the roof over your head. Not a penny. His face turned red. You can't just throw me out on the street. I'm your son. That's exactly why I have to do this, I replied, surprised at my own calmness. I've let you take advantage of me for too long. It hasn't helped you or me. Where am I supposed to go? His voice trembled with rage. I have no money, no job. That's your problem, Torrance, not mine. You're 32. It's time to take responsibility for your own life. He jumped up from his chair, knocking it over. Great, just great. Kick your only son out when he's at his worst. You've always been cold, you know that? All you ever cared about was money, your precious savings. I didn't answer. We both knew it was a lie. If I cared about money, I'd have a decent retirement fund, not the few thousand left after all the loans Torrance had taken from me and never paid back. He stormed out of the kitchen, slamming the door behind him. A minute later, I heard his car start up. He was probably going to one of his friends to complain about how cruel I was, or to a bar to spend the money he stole from me. I made myself some tea and went out into the garden. It was a clear day and the first spring flowers were peeking through the ground. I felt a strange emptiness, but no regret. For the first time in many years, I had done the right thing. Not only for myself, but for him too. Torrance returned late in the evening, smelling of whiskey and cigarettes. I had already gone to bed, but was awakened by noise in the living room. He was looking for something, pulling out drawers and muttering to himself. The next morning he was quiet, avoiding my gaze. I didn't mention the night before, just reminded him of our conversation. 7 days, Torrance, the clock is ticking. He nodded, not looking up from his phone. On the third day after our conversation, the phone rang. Imogen. Her name lit up on my phone screen, and for a moment I thought about not answering. But curiosity got the better of me. Lavinia? Her voice sounded tense. It's Imogen. I need to talk to Torrance. He's not answering my calls. He's not home right now, I replied honestly. I can tell him you called. She paused. The thing is, I need to pick up some things he left behind, my things. What kind of things? My jewelry and some clothes. He won't give them back. He says I gave them to him, but that's not true, especially the rings. They were my grandmother's. I sighed. That was so like Torrance, holding on to other people's things as leverage. I'll talk to him, I promised. But Imogen, I'm not getting involved in his life anymore. He's a grown man and your relationship is your business. I know, her voice faltered, and I wanted to apologize for the wedding, for what I said in the toast. It was wrong. Her apology caught me off guard. Why did you decide to apologize now? Another pause. Because I understand better now what you've been through with him all these years. He's not the man I thought he was. There was genuine bitterness in her voice, and I felt an unexpected sympathy for this woman I had always considered calculating and cold. Maybe she really did love Torrance. Maybe she, like me, had believed she could change him. I'll try to help you with your things, I said, but I can't promise anything. When Torrance came home that evening, I told him about my conversation with Imogen. His reaction was predictable. Her things? He laughed. What about my things that are still in our apartment? The TV, the stereo, the game console? She took them when she moved out. She said it was compensation for the rent I hadn't paid. And her grandmother's jewelry is compensation too? I asked, looking him in the eye. He looked away. That's different. Those rings, they're worth money. I could sell them and at least get back some of what I spent on that damn wedding, which I paid for, I reminded him. He ignored me. You know, she didn't even really love me. She used me to get out of her parents' house, and when she realized she wasn't going to get a mansion and vacations in the Bahamas, she ran away. I looked at my son and saw a boy who never admitted his mistakes. He always blamed others. He was always a victim of circumstances, never their creator. Give her the rings, Torrance, I said firmly. They're not yours, and it's not right. He grimaced. Don't tell me what's right and what's wrong. You have no idea what I've been through. In the days that followed, I learned that Torrance had indeed tried to sell things, his and Imogen's. Rings, watches, designer clothes. He had already managed to pawn some of his electronics. A neighbor saw him loading a stereo and some boxes into his car. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard rumors that Imogen was living with her parents, still working at the post office and trying to save up for her own place, that she had filed for divorce, that she had changed her phone number because Torrance had been calling her in the middle of the night, begging her to come back and threatening her. On the 5th day after our conversation about financial support, Torrance changed his tactics. When he came home, he brought cheap flowers, cooked dinner, burning my favorite frying pan in the process, and tried to strike up a casual conversation about my hobbies. Tell me about your gardening classes, he asked, pushing overcooked chicken toward me. It's so cool that you found a hobby, I told him, watching him with slight confusion. This tactic was new. Usually, he either played on my pity, accused me, or just took what he wanted without asking. After dinner, as we sat in the living room, he finally got to the point. Mom, I've been thinking about Imogen. I raised an eyebrow. And? I think we should make up. Give our marriage another chance. That's your business, Torrance. I already told you I'm not getting involved. Yes, but she won't talk to me. She respects you. If you talk to her, explain that I've changed. I looked at him suspiciously. Changed? How? Well, I've realized my mistakes. I understand that I was selfish. She deserves better, and I want to be better for her. Nice words. But in the 5 days since he came back, he hadn't made a single attempt to find a job. He hadn't cleaned the house. He hadn't done anything to back up his change. If you really want to change, I said, start by giving her back the family jewelry and finding a job. Any job. Prove that you're serious. His face changed instantly. You don't understand. We need your help. If you would just give us some money to get back on our feet, buy some furniture, rent a decent apartment. There was the real reason for his sudden desire to reconcile with Imogen. He thought that if they got back together, I would resume my financial support, that I would take pity on a young family trying to start over. "No," I replied. "I'm not giving you any more money. Not to you, not to Imogen, not to the two of you together. That part of our lives is over." "But without your help, we don't stand a chance," he almost shouted. "You know how expensive everything is these days. Rent, insurance, groceries, we'll never make it." "Other people manage. They find jobs, they save money, they compromise. You can do it too." He looked at me with such hatred that for a moment I felt uncomfortable. "You're just getting back at me for the wedding, for being happy without you. If you were so happy, why are you here? Why aren't you with your wife? Why are you asking me for money?" He didn't answer, just stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. The next day, Torrance disappeared in the morning and didn't return until evening, drunk and angry. He burst into the house, slamming the doors loudly. "I sold the car," he announced, collapsing onto the sofa. "Are you happy now? My last valuable possession." I said nothing. The car had never been his. I had bought it when he was 25. He had never paid for insurance or serious repairs, but there was no point in pointing that out now. "And you know what?" he continued, staring at the ceiling. "It won't be enough money anyway. Not even for the cheapest apartment. Not even for a room in a dorm. You need a job, Torrance. A steady job." He laughed hoarsely. "Who wants me? With my resume? 3 unfinished colleges and 10 jobs I got fired from?" There was self-pity in his voice, but for the first time a glimmer of awareness of reality. Maybe he was finally beginning to understand his situation. "Start small," I suggested. "A cafe, a store, a delivery service, anything to pay for a place to live while you look for something more suitable." He didn't answer, just covered his eyes with his hand. The next morning, Torrance tried again to convince me to talk to Imogen. This time, he approached it from a different angle. "She's all alone, Mom. Her parents can barely stand her. She has no money. She was even crying when we talked on the phone." "You talked to her?" I asked, surprised. "Well, not exactly. She won't answer the phone. But I heard from mutual friends. She's having a hard time." I didn't believe a word of it. But even if it were true, so what? Imogen was a grown woman who had made her own choices. First by marrying Torrance, then by leaving him. "That's not my problem, Torrance, and it shouldn't be yours. You broke up. Move on." "But I love her," he exclaimed with such pathos that it sounded false even to himself. "No, you don't," I said wearily. "You love the idea of her, the idea of marriage, of a normal life, but you're not willing to do what it takes." He looked at me defiantly. "What do you think it takes?" "Responsibility, work, compromise, a willingness to sometimes put another person's needs above your own." "How did you put my needs above your own?" he sneered. "Yes," I nodded. "And look where it got us. I didn't do you any favors by indulging your every whim. It's my fault as much as it's yours." Those words seemed to hit him harder than anything else. He stared at me for a long time, then got up and left the room without a word. That evening, I discovered that my earrings were missing from my jewelry box, a gift from my mother on my 18th birthday. They weren't particularly valuable, but they were very dear to me. Torrance wasn't home, and I knew it was useless to look for him or the earrings. He had probably already sold them or traded them for alcohol. Instead, I changed the locks, all of them, on the front door, in the backyard, even on the windows. Then I gathered his things, put them in a bag, and left them on the porch with a note. "You have broken my trust for the last time. Don't come back until you're ready to live like an adult. And yes, I know about the earrings. I didn't sleep that night, listening for every sound, but Torrance didn't come back. Not the next day or the day after that. On the 3rd day, I got a message from an unknown number. You've always been a terrible mother, cold and calculating. Now I understand why my father left you." Words meant to hurt, to strike at my most vulnerable spot. They would have worked before. I would have cried, blamed myself, looked for ways to fix everything. But now I just deleted the message. A day later, Imogen called. "Thank you," she said without preamble. "Torrance gave me back the rings. He said it was your idea." "It was the right thing to do," I replied. "They're yours." He's very angry with you," she continued cautiously. "He's saying terrible things." "That's nothing new." "I know it's none of my business, but I think you did the right thing, refusing to help him. He'll never grow up if everyone makes decisions for him." I paused, surprised by her words. "Thank you. That means a lot." We talked for a few more minutes about her plans, her divorce, life in Modesto. I felt an unexpected sympathy for this woman who had found the strength to walk away from a situation that was destroying her, who, unlike me, hadn't spent decades trying to save someone who didn't want to be saved. When we finished talking, I went out into the garden and sat on a bench for a long time, looking at the first spring flowers. Inside me, I felt a growing certainty that I had finally done the right thing, not just for myself, but for Torrance, too, even if he would never understand or appreciate it. A week passed, and there was no news from my son except for that angry message. I knew he was somewhere in the city. A neighbor had seen him at the supermarket loaded down with cheap alcohol. I wasn't looking for a confrontation, but I wasn't avoiding one either. I was ready for the confrontation that was bound to happen. And it happened. On Sunday, when I was returning from my Nordic walking class, Torrance was waiting for me at the gate. He looked haggard, unshaven, and his clothes were rumpled, but his eyes were clear and angry. "We need to talk," he said, instead of a greeting. I nodded, unlocking the gate. "Okay, but here in the yard. I'm not letting you in the house." He followed me to the garden table where I usually drank tea when the weather was nice. We sat down across from each other like strangers. "I want you to know," he began, looking me straight in the eye, "that you ruined my life. First you turned Imogen against me, then you kicked me out of the house. Now I have nothing. Are you happy?" I met his gaze calmly. "I didn't ruin your life, Torrance. I stopped letting you ruin mine. There's a difference." He grimaced. "You always think only of yourself. You're selfish." "No," I shook my head. "For 40 years, I thought only of you. And what did that get me? A 32-year-old man who can't support himself, has no career, no home, no stability, who blames everyone else for his problems. It's my fault. I let it happen." "Oh, now you're trying to make yourself out to be the victim? Poor mommy sacrificing her whole life for her ungrateful son? No, Torrance, I'm not a victim. I'm an accomplice. I helped you stay a child when you should have grown up. And now, I'm correcting that mistake." He looked at me in bewilderment, as if he couldn't believe that these words were coming from me, his mother, who had always given in, always compromised. "What do you want from me?" he finally asked. "Nothing," I replied honestly. "I just want to live my life. And I want you to live yours, a real adult life, not the fantasy you've been living until now. What am I supposed to do? Where am I supposed to go?" "That's your choice. It's your life. I'm not going to tell you what to do anymore." He stood up, leaning his hands on the table. "You'll regret this. Someday, when you're old and sick and no one is there to take care of you, you'll remember this conversation." I looked at my son, handsome, strong, full of life, and saw the little boy who never grew up, who never understood that the world didn't revolve around him. "Maybe," I said quietly, "but right now, I don't regret it. For the first time in many years, I feel like I'm doing the right thing, and that gives me strength." He wanted to say something but changed his mind. He turned and walked toward the gate. Halfway there, he turned back. "This isn't the end, Mom. You'll hear from me." I nodded. "I hope so. I hope I hear that you found a job, a place to live, your way. That's all I ever wanted for you." He shook his head and left, leaving the gate open behind him. I remained sitting in the garden, looking at the tulip buds that I had planted in the fall. A strange feeling grew inside me, a mixture of sadness and relief, fear and confidence. I didn't know what the future would bring. I didn't know if I would ever see my son happy and fulfilled, but I knew that I would no longer allow him to manipulate me, use me, or destroy my life to satisfy his momentary desires. This determination filled me with a strength I hadn't felt in decades. I was ready for whatever came next, no matter how difficult it might be. 2 weeks passed after our conversation in the garden. Torrance didn't show up, didn't call, didn't write. I tried not to think about him, filling my days with work in the garden, meeting new friends from my Nordic walking group, reading books I had put off for years. But thoughts of my son still came to me, usually at night when I woke up at the slightest noise, thinking he had returned. Kira urged me to change my phone number, to cut all ties, as she put it. But I couldn't. Something inside me was still waiting, hoping that Torrance would come to his senses, change, become the man he could have been. On the first truly warm day in April, I was working in the garden, planting new rose bushes along the fence, when I heard the sound of a car pulling up. An expensive car with a quiet, powerful engine, unlike the rattling of Torrance's old Ford. I straightened up, wiping my hands on my apron, when I saw two men approaching the house. One was my son, looking unexpectedly neat in a clean shirt and trousers. The other was a middle-aged stranger in an expensive suit, carrying a leather briefcase. "Mom!" Torrance called out to me with false cheerfulness in his voice. "I'm so glad you're home. Meet Mr. Farrow, my new business partner." I slowly removed my gardening gloves, feeling a sense of unease growing inside me. "Business partner?" "That's right." Torrance beamed, taking a step forward. "Can we come in? We need to talk." I hesitated. Something about this situation seemed wrong. Torrance had never been interested in business, unless it involved quick and dubious ways of making money. And this business partner looked too respectable for my son's company. "Mrs. Thorne." The stranger took a step forward, extending his hand. "Pleased to meet you. Your son has told me a lot about you." I mechanically shook his hand, noting his expensive watch and immaculate manicure. "Really? What exactly?" "Only good things, I assure you," he smiled, "especially about your financial acumen." My gaze darted to Torrance, who was avoiding my eyes, shifting from foot to foot like an impatient child. "Let's go inside," I said finally, "but I don't have much time." In the living room, Mr. Farrow immediately took a chair as if he had been there before and opened his briefcase. Torrance sat down next to him on the sofa, still wearing the same nervous smile. "So," began Farrow, taking out some papers, "your son told me about your interest in investing, in particular, investing in real estate." I looked at Torrance, who was now nodding vigorously, as if confirming his partner's words. "I have no interest in real estate investment," I said bluntly, "and I never have." Farrow's face twitched slightly, but he quickly regained his professional smile. "Well, perhaps I misunderstood, but let me tell you about our offer anyway. I'm sure you'll find it interesting." For the next 15 minutes, he talked about some real estate development in the suburbs of Modesto, about guaranteed returns and a limited circle of investors. I listened silently, watching Torrance, who looked more tense with every passing minute. When Farrow finally fell silent and looked at me expectantly, I shook my head. "Mr. Farrow, I'm not interested. I don't have any money to invest, not in real estate or anything else. I live on a modest pension." He frowned and turned to Torrance. "I thought you said your mother had substantial savings." Torrance turned pale. I thought, Mom, what about the money left over from selling Dad's business?" "What business, Torrance? I couldn't believe my ears. Your father never had a business. He was just an office clerk." Mr. Farrow slowly gathered his papers, his face hardening. "It seems there has been a misunderstanding. I apologize for the inconvenience, Mrs. Thorne." He stood up, nodded to me, and headed for the door. Torrance followed him, saying something quietly, probably trying to save the situation. I heard bits and pieces of his words. "She's just being cautious. If we give her time, I'm sure she'll change her mind." When the door closed behind Farrow, Torrance returned to the living room. His face was contorted with rage. "What the hell, Mom? You ruined everything." "What exactly did I ruin, Torrance?" I asked calmly. "Your attempt to deceive this man, or your attempt to deceive me?" "It was an opportunity, a real opportunity to make money. He was willing to take me on as a partner if I brought in an investor. And you lied to him that your mother had money, and you lied to me that he had a legitimate business. Nothing's changed, has it?" He moved closer, towering over me, tall, angry, a stranger I barely recognized as my son. "You just don't want me to be successful," he hissed. "You like seeing me needy, dependent on you. It gives you power." I shook my head, feeling not anger but exhaustion. If I wanted power over you, Torrance, I would have kept giving you money. I would have kept letting you live off me. That's what power is, the ability to control someone through their dependence. Getting philosophical? He sneered. Now you're a great thinker? I thought you were just a petty tax clerk who couldn't keep her own husband. His words were meant to hurt, and once they would have, but not now. Yes, I was a tax inspector, I agreed, and I'm proud of it. I worked hard, paid my taxes, kept this house and you and your father. Yes, he left. But that says more about him than it does about me. Torrance laughed, an angry, barking laugh. Oh, sure, Saint Lavinia. Never at fault. Always did everything right. No, I shook my head. I've made many mistakes, and the biggest one was how I raised you. I let you grow up to be a selfish man who thinks the world owes him something. I didn't teach you responsibility, compassion, or hard work, and for that I ask your forgiveness. He fell silent, puzzled by my words. This was not what he expected to hear. You are asking for forgiveness? Yes. I looked him straight in the eyes. For not being the mother you needed, a mother who would have set boundaries and taught you to stand on your own 2 feet. He blinked, and for a moment something flashed in his eyes. Confusion, perhaps, a glimmer of understanding. But then his face hardened again. Enough of this nonsense. I don't need your apologies. I need your help. Real help. Money to start my life over. No, Torrance. No more money. Then I'll have to take it myself. He turned and strode quickly into my bedroom. I followed him, my heart pounding with anxiety. He stood at my dresser, pulling out the drawers and rummaging through my things. Where are you hiding it? He said through clenched teeth. Savings, jewelry, anything valuable? I know you must have something. Torrance, stop. He didn't listen, continuing to rummage through my things. He found a jewelry box. All that was left were a few inexpensive brooches and my wedding rings, which I hadn't worn since Emmett left. Is that all? He turned to me suspiciously. Where's the rest? There is no rest, I replied wearily. I gave you everything I had of value. Your education, your cars, your wedding. He threw the box on the bed. You're lying. You always hide things. You always say you don't have any money, but you do. At that moment, something changed. It was as if the last thread connecting us as mother and son had been severed. I looked at the grown man who was behaving like a spoiled child and felt nothing but emptiness. Leave, I said quietly but firmly. Get out of my house, now. Or what? He came closer, his eyes narrowing. Call the police? On your own son? If I have to, yes. He laughed, but there was uncertainty in his laughter. You wouldn't dare. I silently took my phone out of my pocket and dialed 9. My finger hovered over the 1. Don't make me do this, Torrance, please. We stared at each other for a long minute. I could see the rage, distrust, and fear fighting in his eyes. Finally, he backed away. Fine, I'll leave. But you'll regret it. When you need help, when you're lonely and sick, don't come to me. I wasn't going to, I replied honestly. He turned and left the room. I heard him stomp down the hallway and slam the front door. Then there was silence. I sat down on the edge of the bed, feeling my hands tremble. What had I done? I had pushed away my own son, my only child, the last person close to me in my life. But then another thought occurred to me. Had he ever been truly close to me? Did he know me? My dreams, my fears, my hopes? Was he interested in what I felt, what I thought, what I wanted out of life? Or had I always been just a source of money and support for him, an ATM with an endless supply of a mother's love? That night, I couldn't sleep for a long time, going over our life in my mind. The moments when I could have said no but didn't. The times when I excused his behavior instead of demanding accountability. All those years when I replaced love with indulgence, support with connivance. In the morning, I called Kira and told her what had happened. She listened silently, then said, You know, my grandmother always said that sometimes to love is to let go. You love Torrance, love. But right now, the best way to show that love is to let him deal with the consequences of his actions. What if he can't? She asked, feeling her heart tighten. What if he ends up on the street or gets into trouble? That's his choice, she replied gently. He's a grown man. It's time to respect his right to decide his own fate, even if we don't like those decisions. After talking to Kira, I went out into the garden. It was a clear, warm day, and bees were buzzing over the flower beds. I thought about my friend's words, about choices, about respect. Maybe that was the heart of the problem. I had never truly respected Torrance as an individual with the right to make his own decisions and live with the consequences. I had always tried to protect him from the world, from himself, and as a result, I had deprived him of the opportunity to become strong, independent, responsible. The next few days passed in a strange, tense calm. I waited for a call from Torrance, news that he was in trouble, something that would make me intervene in his life again. But nothing happened. A week after our argument, I ran into Imogen at the supermarket. She looked better than I expected, fit with a fresh haircut and a clear look in her eyes. "Lavinia!" She waved at me from the fruit section. "How are you?" We got talking, and I found out that she had found a new job at a travel agency with good prospects, that the divorce was almost finalized, that she had met a nice guy, not romantically, just a friend, but still. "Have you seen Torrance?" she asked cautiously. "After the incident?" "No," I replied. "Have you?" She shook her head. "He called a couple of times, but I didn't answer. Then he sent a strange message saying he was leaving Modesto and starting a new life somewhere else." A new life. Somewhere else. I wondered if it was true or just another fabrication. Another way to make us feel sorry for him, to make us worry, to make us look for him. "Maybe it's for the best," Imogen said, as if reading my mind. "A new place, new people, a chance to start over." "Maybe," I agreed, not quite believing it. That evening, I sat on the porch for a long time watching the sunset. Thoughts of Torrance came and went, but they no longer brought the sharp pain they had before. I thought about what it meant to be a mother, about what it meant to love someone truly, without codependency or manipulation. Maybe by letting Torrance go, I finally gave him what he needed most, the chance to be himself, whoever he was, without my shadow hanging over him, without my expectations and disappointments, without my money, which created the illusion of support but in reality only prolonged his dependence. A week turned into a month, then 2. I didn't hear from my son, but through mutual acquaintances I learned that he had indeed left Modesto, either for San Diego or Las Vegas. Opinions varied. Some said he had found a job. Others said he had gotten involved with a shady company. I didn't know the truth, and perhaps I never will. It's strange, but the more time passed, the less it bothered me. It wasn't because I had stopped loving my son. I will always love him, no matter what happens. But I finally accepted a simple truth. His life belongs to him, not to me. His choices are his, not mine. The consequences are his, too. In the summer, I started a new project, a small vegetable garden in the far corner of the yard, zucchini, tomatoes, greens. I enjoyed working with the soil, watching the seeds I planted grow. It gave me a sense of creation that I had been missing all these years. I also signed up for computer literacy classes at the local library. It's never too late to learn something new, I decided, and I was right. New knowledge and new acquaintances brought freshness and interest to my life, which it had been lacking for so long. One August evening, as I was returning from class, I was stopped by my neighbor, Mrs. Higgins, an elderly widow who lived across the street. "Lavinia, dear," she beckoned me over to her fence. "I have something to tell you. Your son was here yesterday." My heart skipped a beat. "Torrance? He's back in town?" "Yes." She lowered her voice to a whisper, even though there was no one else on the street. "I saw him at your house. He was standing at the gate, looking at the house for a long time. Then he got in his car and drove away." "Are you sure it was him?" "Absolutely. I know Torrance well. I watched him grow up." I thanked her and went home thinking about the news. Torrance had come by, but he hadn't called or knocked. He had just watched from a distance. What did that mean? Was he angry? Did he miss us? Was he checking to see if everything was okay? That night, I had a dream. Torrance was little, about 5 years old, playing in the garden. He was laughing and showing me a caterpillar he had found on a leaf. His face was glowing with such genuine happiness, such pure joy, that my heart ached. I woke up with my cheeks wet from tears. Was there ever a chance to fix things? A moment when we could have changed course, chosen a different path? Or was it all predetermined from the start? My loneliness, his early childhood experiences of rejection, the habits and expectations that had formed over the years? I didn't know the answers to these questions. Perhaps there were none. Perhaps we were just two people trying to love each other in the only way we knew how, and we failed. At the end of August, I received a letter, a real paper letter with no return address. I recognized Torrance's uneven, angular handwriting immediately. Inside was a folded piece of paper and a small envelope. "Mom," he wrote, "I'm not asking for forgiveness, and I don't expect it from you. We both did what we thought was right. Maybe someday we can talk about it, maybe not. But I wanted you to know that I'm alive, healthy, and working. Don't worry about me. And this is yours. Happy birthday. I didn't forget. Torrance." In the small envelope were the earrings he had stolen before he left. A gift from my mother, silver with tiny pearls. Not particularly valuable, but dear to my heart. I looked at them for a long time, then at the letter. No apology, no request to get back together. Just a sign. He remembers. He acknowledges what he did. He's making amends where he can. It wasn't reconciliation. There was still a long way to go before that, if it was even possible. But maybe it was the beginning of something new. A relationship based not on dependence and indulgence, but on mutual respect. Or at least on acknowledging each other's existence as separate, independent people. I didn't reply to the letter. I didn't know where to write. But I wore the earrings on my birthday, and when Kira noticed them, I simply said, "A gift from someone who is learning to respect boundaries, and I'm learning too." Autumn came early to Modesto, bringing cool weather and rain. My little garden yielded its last harvest, and I gave the surplus to my neighbors. The roses I had planted in the spring were preparing for winter, shedding their leaves. Life went on, without drama or fireworks, but with quiet, steady dignity. I no longer felt like a victim or a savior. I was just a woman living her life the best way she could. Sometimes, usually in the evenings, I thought about Torrance. Where was he now? What was he doing? Was he happy? Had he changed? But these thoughts no longer caused me pain, only a slight sadness and perhaps a glimmer of hope. Not hope that everything would go back to the way it was, that time had passed, and to be honest, I didn't want it back. But maybe hope for something new, something healthier, more real. I didn't know if it would ever happen. I didn't know if Torrance would ever want to be part of my life again. Not as a dependent child, but as a grown man with his own strengths and weaknesses. I didn't know if I would ever be able to trust him completely without expecting betrayal or manipulation. But I knew one thing. I had done everything I could. I loved him as much as I knew how. And in the end, I found the strength to let go. Perhaps the hardest, but also the most important act of love. And that gave me the strength to move on, day after day, season after season, without looking back at the past with regret, without fearing the future with its uncertainties, just living here and now in this imperfect, complicated, but still beautiful world. I no longer waited for a happy ending, not for myself, not for my son. Maybe there are no happy endings at all, only new beginnings, and every day, every moment gives us a chance to choose who we want to be, how we want to live, who we want to love, and how. This is probably the greatest freedom and the greatest responsibility, the ability to choose your own path, even when it is difficult, even when it leads us away from those we love, even when it leads us to loneliness. Because sometimes, in order to find ourselves, we have to lose everything else. And sometimes, in order to truly love another, we must first learn to love ourselves, with respect, with care, with recognition of our right to happiness and peace. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. No one does. But for the first time in many years, I was ready to face it, without fear, without regret, with an open heart and a clear mind. And in that readiness was a freedom I wouldn't trade for anything, not even the illusion of a family happiness that was never real.